I'm Surbhi Goyal from World Bank, and as you know that we are a development banker. So I will just expand a little bit upon that how we are looking at green hydrogen space and specifically from the financing perspective. So the bank, as you know, generally has a pot of money which we generally come forward with, but it is never going to match up with the requirements of the country or in terms of the technology of a given country. So we try to leverage the maximum of the funds that we have available. And how we do it, that we get involved on a very upstream kind of work with a lot of analytical pieces of work undertaken first for ourselves that helps to position that how and where should the bank be investing. And then we strategize that how we should take it forward in terms of promoting the technology within the country. So for green hydrogen space, for instance, we have done a very deep assessment of the attractiveness index of about more than 30 plus use cases which are applicable for India. Then of those, we have like shortlisted 5 sectors which are going to the topmost priority and taken a deep dive to understand that where the barriers in the value chain itself are there. So our intention is to pick up those barriers one after another, try to see that what kind of constraints exist, whether it's on the policy side, regulatory side, technical side, and how we can bridge those gaps. The essence is that because these are newer technologies, so the confidence of the stakeholders is always low. And this is what we were discussing a few minutes ago, that these conferences help us to bond with each other and get to know each other, but where are the real deals that are still to come? And this is not new for green hydrogen. We have seen it earlier, about a decade ago, for solar panels, then batteries, now for green hydrogen. The growth of green hydrogen is going to be definitely much more exponential as compared to the solar industry or batteries. But then how do we bring that confidence? So we try to, first of all, look at that where should the bank's investments be channeled, where the leverage of the investments are the maximum, which can help bring more private sector confidence, bring more stakeholders on board, be it on the technology side, be on the financial intermediary side, or on developing the industry as a whole. And this is what we are working on in the space of green hydrogen also. So we are having a multi-pronged approach. We are trying to have concessional financing leveraged upon so that the initial costs of our lending is reduced, and it brings down ultimately the end user tariff. Because that is one of the most important constraints that have been told by the industry to us, that off-takers are ready. If you talk to fertilizer industry or any other industry, they are ready to transition, but the first and foremost constraint or the barrier that they keep on repeating is that we can absorb the cost, but we cannot absorb it on balance sheet, so we have to pass it on. And is the end user, which is essentially the agricultural industry, ready to absorb it? And which is a $1 million question, because fertilizer industry itself is heavily subsidized. So how we want to make the maximum use or maximum benefit out of the concessional financing while reducing the impact to the extent possible on the fiscal space of the government is very important. So we are trying to work along that how we can still support these industries where the funds can channel, can be the initial risk taker, provide the platform for the other developers, other generators to come online, and then we start to unlock the economy. So that is, for example, on the fertilizer side. Similarly, what we are also trying to do is that we are doing a mapping study for the hubs, for the green hydrogen hubs across the country, where we are mapping the demand resources, the supply resources, trying to bring them all together, club with the infrastructure facilities. Where are those water bodies? Because electrolysis depends heavily on the water bodies. Where are these transportation corridors? Because our understanding is that initial investments will definitely come into these hubs because the storage and the transportation block is still a big question mark into the entire value chain. For the known reasons, pipelines are not ready, the transportation costs are heavy, storage, cryogenic containers, type 3, type 4 not yet available. So a lot of constraints are there. But as we unlock all these kind of barriers, the generation of the hydrogen would start to move out. And there is where we want to prioritize that which hubs should come first and foremost, followed by the other hubs which are less lucrative, where the generation could be much farther beyond these hubs. But in the parallel, we develop the storage and transportation economy. So this is one piece of work that we are doing. The other piece of work that we are looking at is to see that how we can introduce the financial mechanisms which can bridge the gap between gray and green hydrogen. Whatever we do, however we do, the gap between gray and green hydrogen is there to remain for at least few years to come. How we can take care of these risks which are associated between the gap between gray and green hydrogen, I think is again very important. So with Global Green Growth Institute, we are looking at that how we should structure an organization which can pioneer this effort, what kind of financing instruments should be introduced, whether it should be offtake enhancement measures, offtake guarantees, or risk mitigation instruments. We are still to work on this assignment to begin with. But ultimate objective is that we want to bring the parity between gray and green hydrogen as early as possible. The NDC targets that India has fixed are, 2070. The goals are quite long, but by that time we will already be missing our climate change targets, right? And we have like our future generations to whom we hold responsibility towards. So with these objectives in mind, we are trying to work along all these spaces. We are working with MNRE, we are working with Niti Aayog, we are trying to inform the roadmaps that will come subsequently after the mission to see that how the work that we have already done can provide some inputs to those documents which will chart the way forward for the industries to come in. I think one another important perspective that is to be considered is that financial intermediaries bit, and I'm sure the fellow panelists will touch upon it. What we have seen that FIs are the most risk averse for the obvious reasons, and how these initial investments that the World Bank helps. So we are not doing generally the pilot projects, we help do the demonstration projects through which the lessons can be learned and where the financial intermediaries can start to imbibe on the constraints, the barriers, the strengths, and take it forward. If I take an example of solar, bank was involved in the solar project segment with MNRE. I should say bank is still involved in the solar park scheme of the government. The Riva solar project, if I'm not sure, most of you are aware, but there is where the World Bank group was involved. And how it helped, there was a cost differential of almost 2 rupees between the previous bid and the Riva bid. And how it happened, because majority of the clauses that we had in the previous bids were still in the gray area. In the Riva bid, we tried to put it in the black and white, which reduced the risk premium. So there was nothing, innovative, I would say, in terms of out of the world. It was just that plain vanilla thinking on this risk is best placed with the private sector, this risk is best placed with the public sector. How we should allocate it, what kind of incentives or penalties we should attach with each other so that incentive is, people can be incentivized to produce the results. So I think that was one of the turning points for the solar industry. And after that, we have seen that the prices and the tariffs have not gone beyond 2.97 that we had discovered then. And there, another thing which we learned was that public sector has its own comparative advantage. And same is what we are trying to do in the green hydrogen space. Can the solar park model be replicated in green hydrogen? Because generation side is likely to be driven by private sector. The consumption side would be driven by both public and private. Technology providers have the technologies. We talk about PEM, etc. So where is that the government can provide the support? Probably in the hubs, can the shared infrastructure kind of model be provided? The public sector players come, invest in transmission, pipelines, etc., and make the land, everything available so that the costs are brought down. So these kind of various innovative mechanisms in the models is something that we are trying to work upon. Of course, we keep meeting with a lot of stakeholders. I'm sure I would have met some of your counterparts in some of the meetings when we are undertaking these studies, but we are always open to listen from the private sector players, because ultimately whatever investments we are trying to make is for the economy to open up, to attract more and more commercial investments. That is where our strength and I would say the USP lies. So if you have any innovative ideas which you think should be considered, we would try to take into account in our discussions with the government, as well as when we are designing our own programs for investments. So probably I'll take a pause here, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Goyal. You have covered a lot of things like barriers. You spoke about regulation. You spoke about the risk. You spoke about the green financing. But in the time to come, what are the other barriers you may like to highlight? Other barriers. Say, say the limitations of water availability. Because nobody will buy the electrolyzer if water is not there or green energy is not there.
Yeah, so there is again a mixed reaction to it. Water availability is definitely a challenge, and that too, desal water. So fresh water, how much is that available? Already there is competing requirement for the drinking purposes, etc. And as soon as you put up the desal plants, it will add further to the cost. So that is, I would say, a trade-off that one has to think through. On the other hand, there is always this debate for and against on the water availability. People say that the requirement of water availability for the electrolysis process is very minuscule. And even if you put desal plant, the overall impact on the cost is much lower as compared to the total investments. Um, so in India, I would say we are still in the pilot phase. As we look at the commercial scale projects from elsewhere, there is a mixed bag again of reviews. So we will have to see through that how we should use in India water and what kind of newer technologies we should develop. I think there is where India also lacks, whether we talk about batteries or make in India concept for solar, the R&D, and we were talking over this over the lunch also, that R&D is something that we need to promote in India more and more. Because unless and until we have those incubation centers and innovation centers promoting R&D, we will still be circling in the same commercial level technologies like PEM and others, which will continue to use water. Do we want to wait till there, or do we want to start thinking about building the skill set and promoting R&D to go beyond these kind of technologies? I think this is what we all have to learn as we move along. Not really. I think the R&D should begin right now, because by the time we wait for the technologies to mature, it will be like lithium ion. And there, again, as we know that lithium stocks are concentrated in few countries only, we will again be ending up with the same problem, import dependency. So what are we talking about in terms of energy security? I'm not 100% sure about. So, yeah.